End of my life as a ghost. 5 years ago, I had vanished into the humid air of a coastal town, trading the engine of the private jet hummed with a low, predatory vibration, a sound that signaled the silk sheets of Seoul for the salt-crusted floorboards of a cottage I called my own. I was no longer the woman who stood at the right hand of the Baek-Ho Syndicate. I was a mother who lived for the sound of my son's laughter. But as I sat in the plush leather seat of the king's aircraft, the gold tracker on my wrist felt heavier than any shackle. I looked at Kang-ho, the man who had torn through the fabric of my peace, and realized that while I had been hiding, he had been hunting. This is Afro-K Hearts and Heists, where African passion collides with Korean power, and every heartbeat echoes through the underworld. Subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story that will steal your breath. Let the story unfold. Across from me he sat in silence, swirling a glass of amber liquid that caught the dying light of the sunset. He didn't look like a man who had just kidnapped a woman and her child. He looked like a god reclaiming a lost world. My son Ji-hoon was asleep in the cabin behind us, oblivious to the fact that his father was the most feared man in South Korea. Kang-ho's gaze finally locked onto mine, a piercing, dark stare that told me he knew exactly what I was thinking. "You can hate me all you want, Sora," he murmured, the edge of his voice cutting through the cabin's silence. "But the boy is a Kim, and a Kim does not hide in the shadows, he rules them." I gripped the armrest until my knuckles turned white, knowing that the real battle wasn't escaping him anymore, it was surviving the world he was taking us back to. If you want to see how Sora navigates the lethal politics of the Baek-Ho mansion, and whether she can protect her son from his father's dark legacy, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. The journey into the heart of the Seoul underworld is just beginning. Drop a comment below. Do you think Sora was right to hide the truth, or should she have told Kang-ho from the start? Your engagement helps us bring more of this story to life. The transition from the solitaire freedom of the coast to the suffocating luxury of Seoul was instantaneous and absolute. As the heavy iron gates of the Baek-Ho estate groaned, shut behind us, I felt the final thread of my independence snap. The mansion loomed over us like a mountain of marble and glass, a fortress designed to keep the world out and its secrets in. Kang-ho didn't wait for the guards to open my door. He did it himself, his hand steady as he reached in to take a still sleepy Ji-hoon from my arms. I watched him carry our son across the threshold, the predator and the lamb, and for a moment the sheer weight of my failure pressed the air from my lungs. Inside, the foyer was a cathedral of silence, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of Kang-ho's shoes on the polished floor. He led me not to a dungeon, but to a study filled with the scent of old paper and expensive tobacco. On the desk lay a thick, cream-coloured folder. "Open it," he commanded, his voice devoid of the heat it had held on the plane. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages. It was a meticulous record of my life for the last 5 years. Every hospital bill for Ji-hoon's asthma, every month of overdue rent on my cottage, the predatory loan I'd taken from a local boss when the translation work dried up. Beside each entry was a crimson stamp, settled. "I didn't ask for this," I whispered, the paper crinkling under my grip. "I didn't want your blood money." "It isn't a gift, Sora. It's a clean slate," Kang-ho replied, stepping into the light of the desk lamp. The shadows sharpened the angles of his face, making him look more like a statue than a man. "Every person you owed is gone. Every paper trail that could lead a rival to you has been burned. You are a ghost to the world now, but to me you are a debt that has finally come due." He walked toward me until I could feel the cold radiating from his silk suit. "The price of your freedom was 5 years of my life. The price of your safety is your total submission. You will live in this house, you will play the part of my queen, and you will never mention that coastal grave you called a home again." The realization hit me harder than any blow. He hadn't just saved me, he had erased me. By clearing my debts, he had stripped away the only life I had built for myself, leaving me with nothing but the gold on my wrist and the roof he provided. I looked at the man I had once loved, searching for a glimmer of the boy I knew, but all I saw was the king. I had traded a life of struggle for a gilded cage, and as the realization settled in my chest, I knew the real cost of his mercy was only just beginning to be calculated. If you're ready to see how Sora handles her first night in the lion's den, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for Chapter 3. Should Sora try to run again, or is it time for her to start playing the king's game? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Baek-Ho estate, casting long, sharp shadows that seemed to track my every move. I stood on the balcony of the nursery, my fingers digging into the cold marble railing as I watched the scene below in the private courtyard. I expected to see a drill sergeant. I expected to see Kang-ho treating our 5-year-old son like a foot soldier in his syndicate. Instead, the most feared man in Seoul was crouched low on the grass, his expensive suit jacket discarded on a stone bench, white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark, intricate ink of his tattoos. Ji-hoon was laughing, a bright, untethered sound that felt alien in this fortress of silence. He was showing Kang-ho how to kick a soccer ball, his small legs moving with a frantic energy that Kang-ho mirrored with a strange, calculated gentleness. Every time Ji-hoon stumbled, I braced myself for the coldness, for the demand for strength that I knew defined the Baek-ho bloodline. But Kang-ho merely reached out, his massive hand steadying the boy with a touch so light it was almost reverent. He didn't pick him up. He waited for Ji-hoon to find his footing, his dark eyes watching the boy with an intensity that wasn't possessive, but profoundly observant. Later, from the shadows of the hallway, I watched them in the library. Ji-hoon was perched on a leather chair that swallowed him whole, pointing at the gold-leafed spines of ancient books. Kang-ho sat beside him, not as a king on a throne, but as a man captivated by a miracle. He spoke in a low murmur, his voice losing the jagged edge that usually cut through me like a blade. He was explaining the stars on a celestial globe, his long fingers tracing the constellations for our son. In that moment, the monster I had fled was nowhere to be seen. In his place was a father who looked terrified of his own capacity to love something so fragile. The sight was more dangerous than his anger. I could fight a tyrant, but how could I fight a man who looked at my son as if he were the only light in a lifetime of darkness? It was a glimpse of the man he might have been if the syndicate hadn't claimed him first, and it made the gold bracelet on my wrist feel like it was glowing with heat. I realized then that Kang-ho wouldn't just take Ji-hoon's future, he was going to take his heart, and perhaps, despite everything, he was going to reclaim mine too. If you're captivated by this shift in Kang-ho's character, make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss it. Can a monster truly become a father, or is this just another move in his game? Share your theories in the comments below. I read every single one. The peace of the afternoon shattered with the sudden, violent percussion of breaking glass in the grand foyer. I was in the kitchen, reaching for a glass of water, when the air tension changed, a silent alarm that only those who have lived in the shadow of the syndicate can feel. The laughter from the courtyard stopped instantly. My heart didn't just beat, it thrashed against my ribs as I ran toward the hallway, my voice caught in my throat. I didn't care about the gold on my wrist or the luxury of the walls. I only cared about the small boy who had been playing by the koi pond seconds ago. Before I could reach the door, a hand clamped over my mouth, pulling me into the shadow of a marble pillar. I struggled, my nails digging into a tailored sleeve until I looked up and saw Kang-ho. His face was a mask of cold, focused fury, his eyes darting toward the perimeter. "Stay down," he hissed, his voice a low growl that vibrated with a lethal promise. Through the gap in the pillars, I saw them, men in grey, the colours of the 7 stars, a rival faction that had been circling the Baek-ho territory like vultures for years. They hadn't come for territory tonight, they had come for the leverage they now knew existed. A single shot rang out, muffled by a silencer, chipping the plaster inches from where we stood. I let out a choked sob, my eyes searching the yard for Ji-hoon. "Where is he?" I breathed, my hands trembling so violently I had to grip Kang-ho's shirt. He didn't answer with words. He pointed toward the heavy oak doors of the study, where his most trusted lieutenant was already ushering a confused but unhurt Ji-hoon into a panic room. The relief that flooded me was so intense I nearly collapsed, but Kang-ho's grip tightened, holding me upright. The house, once a sanctuary of quiet luxury, had transformed into a battlefield in a heartbeat. Kang-ho stood tall, stepping out from the shadow to shield me with his own body. There was no hesitation in him, no fear, only the terrifying efficiency of a man who had been born for war. As his men moved in to neutralize the intruders, he turned back to me, his hand cupping the back of my neck with a grip that was both a comfort and a command. "They know about him now, Sora," he whispered, his eyes burning with a dark, protective fire. "The world knows I have a son, and I will burn this city to the ground before I let them touch a hair on his head. The secret is out, and the stakes have never been higher. Do you think Kang-ho can truly keep his family safe, or has Sora's worst nightmare just begun?" The adrenaline from the attack still tasted like copper in the back of my throat as Kang-ho led me deeper into the belly of the mansion. We were in a private terrace overlooking the dark, jagged skyline of Seoul, the city lights shimmering like cold diamonds. I was shaking, the image of those masked men etched into my retinas, but Kang-ho stood at the edge of the balcony, his back to me. The silence between us was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against my chest until I couldn't breathe. "Why didn't you stop me?" I finally screamed, the words tearing out of me. "If you're this powerful, if you can find us in a tiny village in the middle of nowhere, why did you let me live in fear for 5 years? Why did you let me think I had escaped when you were just watching?" He didn't turn around, but I saw his shoulders drop an inch. "I didn't just watch you, Sora, I held back the world for you." He finally turned, and the exhaustion in his eyes stopped the breath in my lungs. For the first time, he didn't look like a king, he looked like a man who had been carrying a mountain alone. 5 years ago, my uncle launched a coup. The syndicate was a bloodbath. They weren't just coming for my head, they were coming for anything I loved to ensure I had nothing to fight for. He stepped toward me, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "If I had kept you here, you would have been executed in that foyer. If I had followed you openly, my enemies would have tracked you within hours. So I let the word spread that I had cast you out. I let the world believe you were a nameless mistake I had forgotten." He reached out, his fingers ghosting over the gold bracelet on my wrist. "I spent 5 years purging every man who knew your real name. I built a graveyard so that you could have a garden. I didn't let you run because I was done with you, Sora. I let you run because it was the only way to keep your heart beating." The anger that had sustained me for years began to crumble, replaced by a terrifying, hollow ache. He had played the villain in my story to ensure I lived long enough to tell it. Every night I had spent shivering in fear of his shadow. He had been standing in that very shadow, a silent sentinel between me and the real monsters. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and realized that our 5 years apart hadn't been an escape for me. It had been a long, lonely war for him. If you were shocked by Kang-ho's secret, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bottle. Was this revelation enough for Sora to forgive him, or is the blood on his hands still too much to ignore? Drop a Team Kang-ho or Team Sora in the comments below. The silk of the emerald gown felt like cold water against my skin, a striking contrast to the suffocating heat of the velvet-lined dressing room. For years I had worn thrift store cotton and the scent of sea salt. Now I was draped in diamonds that cost more than my seaside cottage. As I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her hair was swept into a regal crown of braids, her eyes sharpened with kohl, and her expression was a mask of marble. I wasn't just Sora anymore. I was the statement Kang-ho was about to make to the Underworld. The doors to the suite opened, and Kang-ho stepped in, his presence immediately narrowing the room. He was in a black tuxedo, looking every bit the apex predator he was. He stopped behind me, his gaze meeting mine in the reflection. He didn't offer a compliment, he simply placed his hands on my shoulders. His grip firm and grounding. "The families are waiting," he said, his voice a low resonance. "They think Ji-hoon is a myth, they think you are a weakness. Tonight you show them that you are the foundation of this empire." The gala was held in a ballroom that felt like a cathedral dedicated to power. As we descended the grand staircase, the low hum of conversation died instantly. Hundreds of eyes, calculating, cold and hungry, tracked our every movement. I felt the weight of their judgment, the subtle sneers at the color of my skin and the mystery of my origin. But then I felt Kang-ho's hand slide into mine. He didn't just hold it. He interlaced our fingers, a public declaration of unity that sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. At the foot of the stairs, the heads of the 7 major families stood like a wall of stone. Kang-ho didn't stop until we were inches from them. "My queen," he introduced, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall, "and the mother of the next king of the Baek-Ho Syndicate." I felt the gold bracelet on my wrist pulse with the rhythm of my heart. I didn't tremble. I tilted my chin upward, meeting the gaze of the oldest Don with a stare that had been forged in 5 years of survival. I realized then that I wasn't here to be a trophy. I was here to be the shield for my son. If the only way to protect Ji-hoon's legitimacy was to rule by the side of the monster, then I would become the most formidable shadow the Syndicate had ever seen. The war for the throne has officially begun, and Sora just took the first move. Do you think the rival families will accept her, or is this gala the start of a new bloodbath? The golden luster of the gala had faded into the cold, clinical reality of the mansion's high-security hallways. I had made it through the night by leaning on the only person who didn't look at me like a chess piece, Hana. She was a quiet, soft-spoken girl from the kitchen staff who had brought me lavender tea when I couldn't sleep and played hide-and-seek with Ji-hoon when the walls felt too thick. In a house full of wolves, I had convinced myself she was the only lamb. I found her in the small sunroom near the nursery, her back to me as she folded Ji-hoon's laundry. The relief I felt seeing her was a physical ache. "Hana, thank God," I whispered, leaning against the doorframe. The way they looked at us tonight, I don't know if I can do this. Hana didn't turn around immediately. Her shoulders were stiff, her movements too precise. You did well, Sora, she said, her voice lacking its usual warmth. The 7 Stars families are terrified of you, that makes you very valuable. A cold drip of dread moved down my spine. I hadn't mentioned the 7 Stars. No one in the kitchen was supposed to know the names of the rival factions. How do you know who was there, Hana? She finally turned and the girl I knew was gone. Her eyes were empty, devoid of the kindness that had been my anchor for weeks. In her hand she wasn't holding a tea tray, she was holding a small encrypted transmitter I had seen Kang-ho's security team use. Because I was the one who told them exactly where to aim the glass-shattering charges during the attack, she said, her voice a flat, terrifying monotone. They didn't want to kill the boy, Sora. They just wanted to see if Kang-ho would bleed for him, and he did. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to my stomach. Every secret I had whispered to her, every fear I had confessed about Kang-ho's darkness, had been fed directly to the vultures circling our home. She hadn't been my friend, she had been a parasite waiting for the right moment to drain the life from the Baek-Ho heart. I realized then that my flaw, my desperate need to trust someone, anyone outside of Kang-ho, had almost cost me my son's life again. He's coming for you, I said, my voice shaking but sharp. When Kang-ho finds out, there won't be a corner of Seoul dark enough to hide you. Hana gave a small, tragic smile. I know, but by then the 7 Stars will already have what they need. Predict Hana's fate in the comments. Does she deserve mercy, or has she crossed a line that can't be forgiven? Subscribe and hit the bell to see how Kang-ho handles the snake in his garden. The silence that followed Hana's betrayal was shattered by a sound that every mother hears in her nightmares, absolute, haunting quiet coming from the nursery. I didn't wait for the guards, I didn't wait for permission. I sprinted down the marble corridor, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but when I burst through the doors, the room was empty. The window was cracked open, the heavy velvet curtains dancing in the midnight breeze like ghosts. Ji-hoon's favorite toy car lay upside down on the rug, its wheels still spinning slowly. Ji-hoon, I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat and echoing through the cold, high ceilings of the estate. Within seconds, the room was swarming. Security teams moved with mechanical precision, but I was a blur of frantic energy, throwing open closets and checking behind tapestries. I felt a hand, strong, calloused and unyielding, grip my shoulder. I spun around, ready to strike, but I met Kang-ho's eyes. He wasn't the cold king in this moment, he was a man staring at the abyss. His jaw was set so tight I thought it might shatter, and for the first time, the lethal calm that defined him was flickering like a dying candle. They didn't take him past the gates, Kang-ho said, his voice a low, vibrating growl. My perimeter is airtight, he's still inside the walls, Sora. They're using the service tunnels, the old passages my grandfather built. Then show me, I breathed, grabbing his forearm. I know how he hides when he's scared, Kang-ho. I know the small spaces he crawls into. You have the maps, but I have the heart. If we don't find him now, those 7 Stars shadows will. For a heartbeat, the power dynamic shifted. The Mafia King looked at the woman he had tried to cage and saw his only ally. He didn't command me to stay back. He grabbed a flashlight from a guard and kicked open a concealed panel in the library wall. We descended into the dark together, the air thick with the smell of damp stone and history. In the narrow, flickering light of the tunnels, our shadows merged into one. We moved as a single unit, his strength clearing the path and my instincts guiding us toward the faint, rhythmic sound of a child's sob. In the darkness of that labyrinth, the war between us died. There was no syndicate, no betrayal and no past, only a mother and a father hunting through the dark to bring their light back home. Is this the moment they finally become a real team? The dust of the tunnels still coated our skin, and the adrenaline that had fueled our rescue of Ji-hoon had finally ebbed, leaving a cold, hollow ache in its wake. We were back in the high-ceilinged silence of Kang-ho's private study. Outside. The moon hung low over Seoul, pale and indifferent. Ji-hoon was asleep upstairs, guarded by a dozen men, but the atmosphere between Kang-ho and me felt more dangerous than the tunnels ever had. Kang-ho stood by the window, his silhouette cutting a jagged line against the city lights. He hadn't spoken since we emerged from the darkness. When he finally turned, his expression was unreadable, a mask of stone that hid the man I had glimpsed in the shadows. He reached into his desk and pulled out a small, leather-bound passport and a stack of untraceable documents. He slid them across the mahogany surface toward me. Everything is there, he said, his voice a flat, dead calm. A new identity, a bank account in Switzerland that will never run dry. A flight leaves from Incheon in 3 hours. My men will escort you to the gate and you will be erased from the Baek-Ho records forever. No one will ever find you again, Sora. Not the 7 stars and not me. I stared at the documents, my breath hitching in my throat. This was the dream I had nurtured for 5 years. Freedom, a life without shadows, a life where I didn't have to jump at the sound of a car door closing. But as my hand reached out to touch the cool leather of the passport, I saw the catch in his eyes. "And Ji-hoon," I whispered, my voice trembling. "He stays," Kang-ho replied, the words landing like lead weights. "He is the heir to this throne. He is a Kim. I cannot protect him if he is a ghost in the wind with you, and I will not let him be raised in a village where he is prey. He will stay here in this fortress, and I will raise him to be the king he was born to be." He stepped closer, the scent of expensive tobacco and rain clinging to him. "This is the only time I will offer this, Sora. You can have your life back, you can breathe again, but you leave him behind. Or," he paused, his gaze burning into mine with a terrifying, desperate intensity, "you stay in this cage with us. You become the queen of a world you hate, and you watch your son grow into the man I am. You have 10 minutes to choose." The choice felt like a blade to my heart. To save my soul and lose my child, or to save my child and lose myself to the darkness of the syndicate. I looked at the passport, then at the door leading to the nursery, and I realized that for a mother, there was never really a choice at all. The passport lay on the desk, a silent invitation to a life without fear, but to me it looked like a death warrant for my soul. I didn't need 10 minutes, I didn't even need 10 seconds. I reached out and pushed the documents back toward Kang-ho, my fingers brushing against his cold hand as I did. The look that crossed his face wasn't victory. It was a profound, shattered relief that he tried and failed to hide behind his mask of stone. "I'm not leaving him," I said, my voice no longer trembling. It was as steady as the tide. "But I'm not staying as your prisoner, Kang-ho. If I stay as your equal. I stay as the woman who will ensure our son never has to burn down a city just to feel secure. You want a king? Then you need a queen who knows that power isn't just about blood and bullets. It's about loyalty that doesn't need a cage." Kang-ho watched me for a long moment, the silence in the study stretching until it felt like the entire mansion was holding its breath. Then slowly he picked up the passport and the documents, walked to the fireplace and dropped them into the licking flames. We watched together as my old name turned to ash. "The syndicate won't make it easy for you," he warned, though his voice had lost its jagged edge. "They will test you. They will try to break you to get to me." "Let them try," I replied, stepping into his space until our heartbeats were the only sound in the room. "They've spent years fearing the dragon. They aren't prepared for the woman who tamed him." The sun began to rise over Seoul, bleeding gold and crimson across the sky, signaling the birth of a new era. I walked to the window and looked out at the city that was now mine to protect. Ji-hoon would grow up in these walls, but he wouldn't be a monster. He would be the first of a new dynasty, one built on the strength I had found in the shadows. I felt Kang-ho's hand rest on the small of my back, a gesture that was no longer a claim of ownership, but a vow of partnership. The war wasn't over. In fact, the real battle for the soul of the Baek-Ho Syndicate was just beginning. But as I watched the city wake up, I knew that for the first time in 5 years I wasn't running. I was ruling. The fire in the hearth eventually died down to embers, but the fire in Sora's eyes remained. She had walked into the Baek-Ho mansion as a fugitive, but she stood now as its architect. She realized that Kang-ho hadn't just hunted her for 5 years. He had been building a fortress for a family he didn't know how to ask for. In the underworld of Seoul, power is usually measured by how many people fear you. But as Sora watched Kang-ho finally allow himself to sleep, she knew the truth. Real power is measured by what you are willing to sacrifice to keep those you love whole. The Ruthless King had met his match, not in a rival syndicate, but in the quiet strength of a mother who refused to be erased. And that is where our story ends, or perhaps where the real legend begins. Sora chose the crown not for the gold but for the power to protect. Before you go, I want to know, if you were Sora, could you have forgiven Kang-ho for watching you from the shadows for 5 years? Was it a romantic sacrifice or a betrayal of trust? Let's have a real conversation in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe to Afro-K Hearts and Heists. We tell the stories where passion meets power, and the heart always finds its way home. See you in the next episode.